Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I am Cullen McFader, one half of your hosting team, as always, joined by Clark Coffee down in...
Wait. What was my name?
I don't know. I said it like that. Clack. I'm like going.
It's been. I see.
You know, it was going into the old '40s radio host. I'm doing by Clack Coffee down in.
That's pretty cool. I do like that voice, man. I do like that voice. Well, it's to be fair, we can like pull the curtain back a little bit and expose the behind the scenes. It has been a month since you and I have recorded an episode, and we actually that's been primarily because you've been shooting and you had a wonderful vacation. I think you were in Italy.
Yeah, I was in Sicily, Austria, and Switzerland.
There you go. So I had a very similar trip myself a couple of years ago. It was a really wonderful places. But anyway, so yeah, it's been a month. So you've just forgotten who I am, I guess.
Yeah,
basically.
Clack Coffee. I also forgot what year it is. So.
You forget what year it is and everything.
Tell us, Clack, what's the news on the horn?
Anyway, yeah. Well, I am happy to be back with you, Cullen. Like I said, it has been a month, so I'm really excited to dive in. What are we going to cover this episode?
This episode, long overdue, is My Own Private Idaho, the Gus Van Sant 1991 flick. One of your favorites, if I'm not mistaken.
It is one of my favorites.
Or high up there, yeah.
Yeah, it had, I mean, look, favorites is always a weird term, but yeah, it's a film that had a big impact on me. It was a film that I saw when it was released, when I was 15, and the reason that I saw it, I mean, I didn't know, it's funny, I probably had seen Drugstore Cowboy, which is another one of my favorite kind of pivotal films from my youth. And that, of course, was the second film directed by Gus Van Sant. He directed that right before he did this film. This is his third. But I don't even know if I knew that. I can't remember. I don't even know if, at 13, 14, 15, I don't know if I was keeping track of who directed what yet. But it was River Phoenix. That's who... I think his involvement in this film definitely grabbed my attention as a kid. Somebody who was kind of starting to develop this idea that I wanted to grow up to maybe be an actor. River Phoenix had a really, really, really big impact on me. And I think, just about anybody of my generation, if you watched films, if you cared about the art of acting, River Phoenix was somebody who probably had an impact on you because he was, of his generation at that age, arguably the best.
He was like the Mozart of that stage of acting. Like, and Mozart. I mean that unironically, that it was like he was kind of this protege that was like a really brilliant actor. And it's a
I mean, I think a lot
said
of people
so many times that it was a shame that he died so young, because it would have been so interesting to see what his career turned into.
A major
you really
shame.
see that here.
Yeah,
like I think that you and I both agree that this film for him is a really great showcase of like where his talents could have led.
Yeah.
But no, he's great in it.
So that's
Reeves as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a strong performance by Keanu, and there's a handful of strong performances. There's some kids in here who are actual real street kids, and I think their authenticity shines through, and I think they're great. And but yeah, so I saw the film. We'll kind of start. I always like to start with we can kind of share our personal experiences with the film, because I think, frankly, that's what matters most at the end of the day, But yeah, for me, I saw it. I was probably about 15, 16 when I saw the film. And like I said, I saw it because probably River Phoenix, his involvement drew me to it. But it had a big impact on me. I think it was a film, an early example of a film, a couple different things. One, this film is really kind of like a tone poem. This film is not about plot. It's not about what happens next. It's quite stylized, both in its kind of, stealing some Shakespearean kind of esque dialogue. It's a combination of, I think, 3 different scripts from Gus Van Sant, or 3 different stories kind of smashed together. So
he started writing it in the 70s.
So yeah, so it's got a lot of surreal elements to it, I think. And for a 15-year-old kid who's grown up in Missouri and had a pretty, my exposure to the world was pretty small at that point in time. This kind of showed me a couple things. Like, one, like, wow, film doesn't have to just be about plot. Oh, it can be like this kind of tone poem, and it can be about, a feeling, right? That was a huge kind of revelation to me as a kid. And it also and this, I think this film is a good example. It's one of many films that I saw as a kid and books that I read, that really helped expand my horizons of empathy. And you know, and I guess maybe this is why I'm drawn to acting and to filmmaking and storytelling, but I just have an insatiable desire for the human experience, and that is such a broad and deep thing. And I'm always wanting to learn more about people with different lives and people with different backgrounds. And this was just a really interesting story of kids who were not too much older than me, these characters, but they had such radically different lives.
Yeah, I think they're like just turning 21 in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, just really, it was just so. I don't know. It was just it just really stood out to me. Yeah. So yeah, and then it's interesting because watching it now for this podcast here, I don't think I've seen it in maybe 20 years. So really interesting for me to see it now, and kind of I have this memory of it having seen it so long ago. So it can kind of, as we go through this, I'll kind of talk a little bit about how watching it now as a 45-year-old was different than watching it as a 15-year-old. But yeah, what about you? What were your experiences with the film?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I watched this was a few years ago, 2019.
At my suggestion.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I was supposed to. I was heading down to California to do a film with you and meet up with our Soldiers crew, and we were kind of sharing films back and forth with each other as to like what potential inspirations or points of like interest might be for what we were going to do. And one of the ones that you suggested for me was this. I think it was this and Drugstore Cowboy were the two that you kind of sent up.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it at the time, and again, I was immediately fascinated by the Shakespearean elements. Like kind of he said that it's kind of like an amalgam of like Henry IV, part one and two.
There's kind of loosely based on and kind of pieces and snippets of Henry IV's part 1 and 2, and I think even a little Henry V. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and I think that to me, what again, I'd done a lot of Shakespeare in the theater program I was in high school. And kind of had a really great fascination for it, and always, I've always been a fan of Shakespeare, and especially delivering Shakespeare and actually, acting in Shakespearean works, I think is always, kind of an unforgettable experience for a lot of actors.
It's certainly a challenge, and
I think, definitely, to get the enjambment down, and
to understand it for
to get the
to actually
meaning
understand
of so much of the text down. But it was to me like it's one of those things where I'm kind of hit or miss with a lot of like Shakespearean modern adaptations in the way that the Baz Luhrmann Romeo plus Juliet doesn't,
which you
kind
didn't
of a miss
like
for me. I'm not big on that one. It's very on the nose. It's very much playing up this.
I did think it was fun,
kind
though.
of like this. It's fun, but it really plays up this the element to the degree that kind kind of teeters on a bit ridiculous, very theatrical. Whereas there's a lot of ridiculousness in this. There's a lot of theatrical elements of this movie, but I think to me the way that it is infused within the story and the context and the themes of the movie, they feel much more appropriate for that kind of thing. Even though, of course, that is Romeo plus Juliet is literally a Shakespearean story. This one, I think the direction is just a lot more centered on where it wants to be and where it wants to blend in those modern tones, the modern themes, and modern elements of storytelling and filmmaking, and even just cultural context with this kind of classical style of timeless storytelling that is this very Shakespearean. The moment when they have that big strange sword fight in the park when they're all in the little pink onesies and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Feels kind of something straight out of a number of Shakespeare plays.
Oh, doesn't it? Yes.
Like The Taming of the Shrew, even.
Yeah.
And but it really feels right for the movie simply because of the fact that we've been enveloped in this story of just this kind of these really weird characters, and every character is this kind of odd study in a different type of person, and sexuality, and this dreamlike nature of the whole movie where because we of course have a character dealing with narcolepsy, that it's there's this really interesting dynamic in the movie of like what is real and what's like hallucinated or what's dreamt, and you know, that he doesn't give answers in terms of like editing. You'll have just moments where suddenly you'll cut to this surreal image of like a house falling on a
Right.
highway in the desert, and
Right, but what a beautiful symbology of a
yeah,
climax. I mean, I thought
yeah,
that was I don't and I I meant to look it up and I haven't, but that's clearly, of course, that's not CGI in 1991.
hmm
I'm curious to know exactly how they did that shot. Did they?
yeah, maybe
But it's
big giant
beautiful.
crane. But no,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so then that was kind of the first, like at the first time that I saw it, really, yeah, kind of swept me up in that.
Hmm.
And then I watched it twice for this episode.
Oh, okay.
And I think again, revisiting it, I had forgotten a lot of the more stylistic parts of it that I really liked.
Yeah.
Even, you know, things that we'll get into later, but like the use of tableau.
Yeah, which I
I
think
thought
is
that was
so
really, really
intriguing here.
cool.
Yes, yes.
The use of color, even,
Hmm.
like it's not. I would say that cinematography is by no means surreal or super, you know,
Stylized. It's not
heightened or stylized, but
right.
there's moments where they use like elements of, you know, where Keanu's face is half red,
Hmm.
and
There's a lot of
just this
reds. There's a lot of
really,
yellows.
yeah, this
Yeah.
really deep, rich color that comes out of the film stock. And um, I think that it's again, it's kind of this thing where I think the reason that I appreciate it so much and that I appreciate the avant-gardeness of the movie is because it feels really, really built into the actual structure of the movie, and
Hmm.
it feels like it's like a part of it, that it came out of everything, that was like it wasn't
It's
added or tacked
authentic. It's
on. It's
authentic. It's
authentic, exactly.
yes. It's like
Um,
this was, this is a director working authentically, and frankly, a cast and a crew. I mean, it's firing
exactly.
on all cylinders. Right, where this isn't a calculated approach or some gimmick or some which a lot of times I think extreme style or kind of when people attempt to kind of go in a surrealistic direction, a lot of times it feels very gimmicky. It can,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I don't think it does it all here. I think everything feels extremely authentic here.
hmm
Um, and I think that really, that touches you, I think, on a deep level. It goes back to why I was so moved by the film as a kid, because even as a kid, I don't know anything about film technique. I mean, this is well before I ever studied film to any extent whatsoever. I'm just kind of, but everything worked on me. You know what I mean?
hmm
I wasn't analytical. I wasn't in my head. It bypassed all those things, and it really worked on an emotional level for me. And that's the key.
Yeah.
Do the stylistic choices work emotionally?
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
and I think they really do here. I mean, hey, look. First of all, it's. I'm glad that you like the film. It's always nice when somebody, when I suggest a film to somebody, especially one that, is a little bit, different than mainstream. I'm always
hmm
curious to see. Well, there's a good chance that person might not like it, but it sounds like you did enjoy this film. So
Yeah. No. Yeah. Definitely an enjoyable rewatch, especially. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This film came out in '91, and
hmm
I kind of, it's trying to like think back, like put the film in some context. I think, right off the bat, we've got to think about the kind of the landscape of, the representation of gay characters in films
hmm
in '91. And I think this clearly is a film that I think is considered a landmark film or a really important film for gay or queer cinema. And I think that was one of the things that stood out to me as a kid, um, was that the film really treats these characters as just like they don't martyr them, they aren't idealized, they aren't stereotyped.
hmm
It's like very matter of fact, and I think that's significant. I think at the
Yeah.
time when this film was released, there wasn't a lot of that going on.
It's not patronizing in the slightest. It's very
And it's not
authentic, and yeah.
reductionist. Yeah,
Yeah.
um, it's and so even I couldn't have articulated that, of course, when I watched the film. But I guess that's what I'm trying to say when I said that this film was like a empathetically broadening film for me.
hmm
Um, you know, not being gay myself and growing up in Missouri and in the time in which I grew up, I did grow up around a lot of casual homophobia. I mean,
hmm
that's just a fact. It was, and I say casual, not that it was, I mean that it was everywhere, prevalent, as a straight person, that's just how kids would talk. And I mean, and so it had a big impact on me in that way of opening my kind of like exercising my empathetic muscles and like, whoa, there's like lots of different people out there, and
it's
people.
Not just the stereotype. Yeah.
And I can like see myself here. It's like we all experience longing for love and longing for home. And I know it seems maybe ridiculous as adults. We've got a lot more life under our belt. But to a little 15-year-old kid growing up in Missouri, sometimes these things can be really eye-opening for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's why one of the reasons this film is so important to me is that it kind of helps show me, along with many other works of literature and film, how powerful art can be. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but I think it's important context. I think this was I think that we could definitely say that it was a landmark film in that way.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you look at the prior depictions of like homosexuality or even just any gender or sexuality kind of variances in film.
Yeah.
And either you have something where it's used as an element of like a horror,
mm-hmm. Right.
or it's a gag,
yeah.
or on the kind of
right.
other
it's
end
the
of
butt
that
of
spectrum,
a joke.
it's this like the entire film centers around this like tragedy about that person's identity, and it's all centered like that person doesn't have an identity. It's just that
they're
one
reduced
element of they're
to
reduced
that one
to
element.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And so I think that it's very true that like when this film, the fact that they are gay or bi or it's never really specified, because Keanu Reeves of course goes with both.
Yeah.
Or even some cases it's almost hinted that it's just kind of like an element of like making money, and but you never, it's never something that is like, again, patronized, or it's never like centered on in such a degree where it just feels like it's preaching.
Yeah.
And I think that really makes it much more authentic. It makes it much realistic, and it makes it easier to just, I think, relate, to this really, again, you just kind of feel what the characters are feeling, in a way that kind of surpasses that one sticking point that a lot of other movies would really harken on.
And we've had some, and I think you and I talked a little bit, before we started recording, of some examples of, kind of these Oscar bait films. Oftentimes they're biopics. It seems that, we find a lot of this, and the opposite of what we're describing for My Own Private Idaho. We see the opposite of that a lot of times in these biopics where, characters they're reduced, and the complexity and nuance of their humanity is just taken away, and they're turned into martyrs, or they're turned in, and it's just, it's just unpleasant to see. It's not interesting. And I feel like it's insulting to the real human beings these films are about, these.
Well, and I think it's one of those things too, for me, that really, a more recent example of a movie that I think does it really well, and it is honestly similar-ish in subject matter to My Own Private Idaho, is Moonlight,
which I have
found
not seen, unfortunately.
What I liked about that, and what I like about this, is that it, like, the characters still, they're flawed, they're human, they're human. It's a story about somebody. It's not a story about, and I just think I can see, to me, why this would have been such a breath of fresh air for, the gay community, or even just like a gay kid growing up, just thinking like, it's about time that there's a movie that comes out where it's a happenstance part of their personality, and it's not just about, X, Y, and Z aspects of their, and I think that's, exactly what you're saying. There's so many biopics that come out that are just about the one element of this person's life.
The one element, like a handicap, or their sexual orientation,
and it just becomes...
those things are all important. Like, don't
but also very often done by people who either aren't gay or aren't trans or aren't, that it's like this like pat on the back.
Right.
Whereas, of course, Gus Van Sant is a gay man. And so it really, I think undoubtedly that's where a lot of the authenticity comes from, where he doesn't feel the need to pander. He doesn't feel the need to give this like heartfelt, martyrdom to these characters. He can just make these characters be real to what he experienced, and I think you feel that exuded throughout the whole movie. Even if Gus Van Sant wasn't actually, a male prostitute or whatever.
Sure.
And
No, I'm pretty sure that he did not have that experience, and
yeah,
I think he actually grew up with quite a bit of money. I think his family was
they
quite
were
wealthy.
pretty well to do. Yeah,
and
so but you still get this idea of where like how deep identity can go for somebody, and how if you actually play that authentically and you just put that into the movie as what it would be and what it feels like to be that character, and that these characters aren't stereotypes, they're not. They're not caricatures of what people at the time especially would imagine a gay person was. It goes a long way, and I think that you, if anything, are a testament to that, being 15. Because even when I was 15, or maybe a little bit younger, but when I was like in middle school, there was still, at that point, still a lot of casual homophobia and just culture at that time. And that's like the mid to late 2000s, and there was still, you could go to a movie and there would still be plenty of jokes at any marginalized group's expense. And so I think the fact that this movie convinced a 15-year-old kid in rural Missouri to have empathy for, towards people that I'm sure that in passing you'd probably run into gay people, but that weren't out. Right, that were very much likely.
It was not within my
deeply
experience at that point of my life, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's a testament to this movie's authenticity and the far reach of just taking that authenticity to a point where it exudes itself in the film itself and the story and the characters, rather than again being preachy.
Yeah.
I think that kind of
power.
shows. Yeah.
It's a wonderful power that art can have. Yeah. So. Yeah, well, and there's other I think that's probably one of the most significant kind of contextual, pieces about the film. But there's like, in a totally different way, kind of a fun kind of context for me, just like kind of personally, totally different direction than that. But like I said, I was a big fan of River Phoenix's, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about performances and the people in the film. But Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers is actually he's actually in this film, and
McFly.
And he was in a handful of films, right? Back to the Future, but he was in a handful of films. I mean, I think over his whole career, he's been in about.
He was in the Edgar Wright movie a few years ago.
Yeah. But but it's like, but Flea's in it. And of course, Flea was in the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and of course, their guitarist, and I probably mispronounced this. I think it's Frusciante. Is it Frusciante or Frusciante?
Something. Yeah.
But John is the guitarist in that band, and I happen to be I'm not a super huge Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, but I am a very, very, very big fan of John's, and I think that he's really an extraordinarily gifted musician and guitarist. And just a small plug, if people out there, if you've not listened to any of his solo work, I recommend you check it out. Really, it's quite significantly different than the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Anyway, but River Phoenix and Flea were friends, and so I guess River ended up getting to know John, and River was even on John's his first solo album, Neandria Lades, and Usually Just a T-Shirt. I think it's actually 2 like EPs put together, but that's John's debut solo album, and River's on that. And I think he's even in a few more pieces of
he's in a Red Hot Chili Peppers music video too.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is there was like this fun little group of like, clearly these are friends, they're like sharing in each other's projects, and I always thought that was kind of fun. I don't know if you find that but you're kind of
I love those little kind of like collectives,
where it's almost like this little universe, that's kind of, you're like, and especially this is like pre-internet, and I'm like, it would be fun to kind of pick up these little pieces, like, oh, that's River Phoenix on that song.
It's kind of like the Mel Brooks, Richard Pryor, like the group of them, the Gene Hackman, Wilder, that all kind of, they would just appear in each other's works because it was fun.
And it was fun to pick it out. You'd be like, oh, there they are, or So I thought that was kind of fun. That was like a fun little piece for me, just as contextually for this film. And of course, I already told you that I'm a big fan of Drugstore Cowboy. But let's go in then to Gus's direction and talk a little bit about that. I think one of the things that like stands out to me pretty significantly about Gus Van Sant's direction is the improvisation and looseness, and not just he definitely gave his actors a lot of room to improvise. Matter of fact, River Phoenix actually completely rewrote the pivotal, important campfire scene where he expresses his actual true love and longing to be close to Keanu Reeves' character. But he actually, Gus Van Sant, let River Phoenix rewrite that entire scene, which I think is pretty amazing. But he also, I've heard him talk about it, and you can see it in the work. Very loose with his blocking state. He would storyboard anything, kind of going back a little bit to Werner Herzog and not ever wanting to storyboard anything. But you can feel that, I think. Not that it doesn't feel thought out.
Like
it definitely feels thought out and refined. Yeah. But you do get a sense of spontaneity. You get a sense of looseness.
Well, I also wanted to say on that point, too, that it's like a very rare talent to have somebody who has this improvisation in their movie so throughout, but also at the same time, the camera work feels collected, and it feels intentional, and it feels
absolutely
pointed. Like there's not a ton of just like handheld going through conversations
generic
where
there's not
you just
a lot
feel
of
like someone's following and just like trying to keep up with the actors. It's this really neat kind of dance with the actors who are clearly improvising, but also that the camera is able to, like, you've got such skilled technicians in direction that you can still make it seem like there's an articulated camera movement that was thought out prior while these actors are improvising, which I think is really, really rare and again, a good testament to his directional talent.
Well, and we actually have two people who are credited as cinematographers. We've got John J. Campbell and Eric Allen Edwards. And I think Edwards did most of the lighting and Campbell operated camera, I think. But we do have two people listed. I think, you're right. What I see in the work is a lack of generic camera. And when I mean generic camera, and you see this a lot, I think, in television, right? Where you see just a lot of really generic over the shoulder, two-shot.
We need to capture the scene's coverage.
We're just utility, I guess. I kind of call it like utility shooting, where it's just we got to get it done. Let's get our coverage and move on. Well, you definitely don't see that in this film. I think there are sprinkled throughout the film a handful of actually quite technical camera moves or camera work, and I think that putting those quite technical pieces in there, I think really helps contribute to that overall feeling that it's that it really spent some serious time and consideration. I mean, just things that kind of just come at me right now. There's a really beautiful crane shot where we come down off the roof of a building and we go through a handful of hustlers that are on the street corner into the adult bookstore. I think that's
and then Keanu's on the front cover,
and then well, that's another shot that we'll get to in a second because it's really cool. But that's like a really technical, I think, very choreographed, very poetic shot. You've got some interesting. I mean, you've got a camera on a motorcycle pointed up at the handlebar. It's a really interesting, unique angle. There's a lot of, I think, really clearly like very specifically choreographed shots. But then you've also got some handheld mixed in. You've got the opening shot is handheld. It's actually
but again, it's one of those things that I always like divide handheld into two different categories. There's like there is the handheld, which is a choice, which is a planned, you've got very specific blocks and markers that you've got to hit in that handheld. And then there's the second type of handheld, which I think is, the messy kind of lazy way of doing it, which is just like, we don't really want to put a camera on the tripod, so we're just going to follow the action.
We want to save time.
And it's very much the first type. Like you can very much tell,
and it's
even
well
in the
done.
handheld moments that it's very thought out. It's methodical. It's it's like one of those things that I always admire Spielberg for being able to do that as well, where there's, especially in his later films, there's a lot of handheld in Spielberg's films, but you can always tell that wasn't just a choice out of laziness or saving time. It was a choice out of like, this would work here because this is the feeling of the scene. And I get that a lot in this, which is that, which is again kind of my point about the improv, which is why it's so special to me that it does still feel so refined, and that it feels very directed in a very good way, not not that you're like feeling
it feels
choices,
conscientious.
Exactly.
And it's interesting too, and it's like I mentioned the very opening, you would kind of have I think this is a good example of that thoughtfulness, especially with the handheld work. You've got the movie opens on a scene with River Phoenix character on the road. which is this is. I mean, we haven't really talked about that so much, but this is in a way a road movie. This is kind of in the tradition of the road film, and but he wakes up, and this is a handheld shot. But it's one of the better handheld shots I've seen in a long time. And I'm pretty sensitive to handheld camera work. I am not a fan of shaky. I'm not a fan of just like, putting movement in a shot because we want to try to give it some kinetic energy.
Yeah, you got to make it exciting.
I think you and I both agree. I like a heavy camera. I like a weighty camera.
I like to feel the intention of like a movement.
Yeah. But it's extremely well done. But then we bookend it that the film ends with the exact same shot in effect. But this time we're on tracks, and it's a dolly shot, and the contrast that they're making about where the character was when he started and where we are when we end and what we've gone through in the movie is a very conscientious choice to have a different type of shot at the end, the dolly versus the handheld. But the film it's just a small example, but the film is full of these kinds of thoughtfulness.
And it's it's like a grand approach to this like kind of surreal dreamlike feel of the movie too. Like that opening shot feels very dreamlike. It feels very, and you're intercutting with these like just flashes of imagery of like seemingly unrelated imagery, but you realize throughout the movie why he's thinking about those images, why they're coming up, of like houses being destroyed and things like that. And
well, we've got the time lapse. We could talk about that.
Time lapse photography.
We have some really wonderful time lapse photography. We've got I think there's some 8mm footage, if I'm not mistaken. It's either 8 or 16.
The old home footage.
The old like simulated home footage. Where we have Rivers' character thinking back, trying to pull these memories of his past when he felt like he had a home and he felt safe with his mother. He's always trying to get back to that. I think that was really well done. There's quite a bit of it. But it's really well done. We've got, you'd already mentioned the tableau. I want to talk about
that's a really interesting. So there's three. I think it's only used or is it three times?
I think there's three times. I think we have. There's maybe I'm wrong. We have Keanu Reeves' character with the woman that he meets in Italy in the farmhouse. We have the threesome
with the German guy,
and who is like fantastic, like character.
That's
fantastic Udo Kier, I think, is Hans. And I felt like there was another, but maybe I'm making that.
There
up.
might have been. Those are the two that stuck out to me.
Those are the two that stand out.
But it's this really interesting thing where it's like you get into this like sex scene, and suddenly it's just these flashes of tableau that aren't stills. They're not freeze frames. You can tell the actors are still frozen. Breathing and moving, but it's like this really interesting, and they're in these incredibly almost Renaissance painting like positions of like the intermingled like arms and beautifully lit and again, it really exudes that kind of this 15th century Shakespearean feeling to me of like this like artfulness.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So I mean, like, that's kind of what I got from it. Just that it felt like those Renaissance paintings of just these like nude bodies that are intertwined, that are together. Especially, I think the one that I thought was the most beautiful was Keanu and the farm girl in the Italian farmhouse, because
Carmela,
just that image of like the light coming through the window and they're standing on the windowsill, just like kind of embracing each other fully nude, and it's this really, really incredible
and I want to say
way to do
I want to say, I don't know how you feel. I will take like a small digression here, but I feel 99% of the time that sex scenes in films are almost like 99% of the time they are the opposite of sexy. They're cheesy. I don't know. It's like it's either they're gratuitous and it's obvious they're gratuitous,
or director clearly feels kind of uncomfortable about like
and everybody
doing it in a way.
But so it was so interesting to see this extremely unique way of doing this. In a certain sense, it's like, and I think it's for the reason that you just described, that it I don't know, it removes us a little bit so we don't feel awkward, right? But we're allowed to kind of look at the beauty of the scene, and in a way that's almost more sensual than, and I think it was extremely effective, and I would consider stealing this technique at some point.
I think it's a wonderful, wonderful technique I've literally never seen done again, and
I've never seen it
that
done
I haven't.
Again. I
agree with you. I think that like I'm also not like, I don't think that there's a lot of people who are like, oh, sex scenes should never be in movies because they're always tertiary. I don't think that. I think that there's a lot of like very powerful statements that you can like, just like in this movie, that you can
Sure.
make with a like
Yeah.
sexual moment. Or I mean, on kind of the other end of the spectrum from this, a very grounded and real like sexual moments and like Basic Instinct. I think that those sex scenes are like both incredibly like erotic, but also at the same time are very well crafted. And so but it's kind of, again, it's like the opposite end of the spectrum of like, you're kind of removing all of the art house in that instance,
Yeah.
whereas this one really embraces that kind of that very art house avant-garde
Yeah.
feeling, where it's like you're just getting these almost flashes of memories, which to me almost feels like really, really psychological, in that it's like this kind of like, you know, post-sexual feeling of just like these flashes of memories, as
Yeah.
opposed to like existing in the scene with those characters as they're doing
Which
it.
feels more, it feels more accurate to memory. That's
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of regard of
exactly.
whatever the thing is that you're remembering, where they're like
It's like
these
this
snapshots,
adrenaline,
these
yeah.
yeah. Very interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that context either. But yeah, it's and I've not seen this since. And I think it's a very interesting choice to not use actual freeze frame, like you said, but it's actual, we've got running film. It's 24 frames per second, but we have actors posed together and they're doing their best to hold still.
And it's only like 2 seconds per shot.
Yeah,
too,
it's
like
maybe
very
2 seconds,
quick.
but it's enough. You can see the breath. You can see, because they're kind of contorted in challenging positions, I would imagine, just logistically as an actor. I bet, some of these positions are probably hard to hold. And you can see that they're kind of struggling to do so, that there's movement in their bodies, which frankly, I think adds, actually, as opposed to distracts from the technique. I found it really intriguing.
No, yeah, it felt really organic. Like you were like, again, to me, it felt like these, like I think that if he had done freeze frame, it would have taken away that feeling of like this living Renaissance painting. Whereas like the fact that it's live, it feels like you're like seeing something in person, that it's like this brilliant like work of art, or even like not even necessarily paintings. I mean, I definitely get a lot of paintings from it, but like statues, even like marble statues embraced. You feel like these statues have come to life, but are still.
Gus was a painter, or is a painter, but I think he has a lot of painting experience, and so that it's very possible that that's maybe part of the connection for him with that. Interesting. Well, let's like jump a little bit as we cruise through here to performances. We've touched on like some of this for sure, but I kind of wanted to just hit this again. I mean, we've already talked about River Phoenix. I think, across the board, I think just about everybody agrees that this is one of, if not his best performances, and in a career that was short but quite substantial. I think when he was younger, Stand By Me was another one of his really...
He also had the small part in third Indiana Jones, I think.
Oh, yeah, where he played Indy. Yeah, and that exposed him to a wider audience.
Huge audience, yeah.
To a huge audience. But yeah, I mean, this was, one of his last performances, and maybe one of his most significant. And like you've already stated, I mean, it hints at, doesn't even hint. I mean, it directly, you see, like, he is extremely captivating. He feels very authentic, and there's like just really physicality. I think one of the things that really strikes me about this performance, I'm curious if you noticed or what you think, was his physicality. I mean, this character is narcoleptic. There's some, I don't know, how to describe it. I mean, it seems like so much of his acting is so perfectly conveyed through this character's physicality. That
he plays
really
with the
strikes
vulnerability
me.
really well.
Yeah, it really strikes me. Yeah. And River always, I think, had a vulnerability about him that he communicated through his work. And it's
really interesting in contrast to Keanu Reeves' character, who is like very confident, very, he's the one that's making these grand speeches and fooling with Bob Pigeon, and like all these like moments where he, and he just is able to like go to his father and directly stand up to him and say,
the stakes are radically different for the two characters.
Exactly.
I think Keanu does a good job.
Has this safety net of like his character. I mean, not Keanu Reeves, but he has this safety net of, explaining why he's not vulnerable, explaining, very much alluding to the fact that he doesn't have that much to lose. And of course the film ends with him getting that and essentially breaking off from this lifestyle. But I think that Keanu, I mean, I mentioned this when we were having our little preliminary chat, but I had just the other night rewatched the Coppola Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and which of course stars Keanu Reeves. That he got a lot of flack for that role.
Oh
because
my,
he's kind
did
of
he
doing
ever?
this British accent, and he's not great at it. But I actually like really enjoyed his performance in it. This time I watched it, like he plays up. That whole movie is so stylized and so like surreal in a way, very very similar to this, like where there's just like very nothing feels real in the film. Like that it doesn't bother me, and I found the same with this, where it's like I think River Phoenix is the star in terms of authenticity, but Keanu Reeves to me plays up the Shakespearean elements to like a really lovely degree. Like he's almost like delivering these lines like he's on stage, and I love that. And I'm sure that was intentional. Like I'm sure that Gus Van Sant likely directed him in that way to have this like really confident, again, almost like the Tybalt of the movie, where it's like this like confident monologuing like dance like character who like captivates the room when he's in it, and then you've got River Phoenix who's quiet and brooding, and it's very interesting, this dynamic between the two leads.
It is,
and it's a shame that they didn't get to do more together, because I think that they had a lot of really great chemistry working together as well.
And they were certainly friends in real life. I think a little bit of the story, I think they kind of formed a pact that they would both do this film or not do this film, but that they would do it together. So I know River and Keanu, they had worked on a film previously together. They were friends, and they kind of talked each other into the film. And so I think you can see that. I think, there is a good chemistry. And Keanu Reeves, and I've heard even some criticisms of his performance in this film. And of course, I think he's come around to his career to such a place now that he's fairly beloved. I think, he has a reputation for being extraordinarily kind and generous in real life as a human being. And
from Toronto,
he's so ubiquitous. I mean, he's everywhere, I think everybody just kind of loves him at this point, regardless of whether you think he's an outstanding actor or not. But I do think it's easy to take him for granted. And I do think that he is quite good in this film. I think another performance that's worth pointing to would be Bob, the character of Bob, played by William.
Which is another interesting story.
Richard. Is it Richard?
Richard. Yeah, I think it's Richard. Yeah.
I mean, it's so. William is actually a director, and he had directed a film that River Phoenix had been in. And so the story goes that they had already cast that role with somebody else, but that actor wasn't working. And so when they needed to find a replacement at the last minute, River Phoenix had William in mind and talked him into performing this role. So I don't know that William had a ton of acting experience before this. I'm not quite certain, but I do know.
But he's a lot of fun.
Yeah, but he's a lot of fun. I think he is absolutely great. Now, he has by far the most Shakespearean kind of twist and dialogue of any of the other characters. But his character is absolutely fantastic. And I think it's a character that you could easily miss the mark on. And it's because he's over the top. But I think he just nails it. I think it's a fantastic performance. And then, of course, you've got Flea. And, like, what can you say? You can't say anything bad about Flea.
Oh,
Flea
man.
is awesome. What am I going
No, he's so much fun.
You got to love Flea. I think he always brings so much energy to everything he does.
God, yeah.
I mean, whether it's his music, whether it's his acting, and I read his recent autobiography, and I'm just like, how can you not love Flea?
I mean, I don't know anything about his personal life, but he seems.
I don't either.
Like
I don't know
nice
anything
guy.
about his personal life.
He sounds like he just seems from what I've seen and what I like look at. He just seems like he'd be like a great.
I'm sure
great
somebody's probably going to like call us out that he's done something horrible. I don't know, but but from his work, which is the only way that I know him, he definitely has a lot of energy. And he brings it to this film for sure. Well, I think, what else do we have to discuss? Music, we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, briefly, there's a really neat soundtrack on the movie. Again, you kind of mentioned that it's very Coen Brothers-y almost, there's one song about the cattle rustling or whatever, and
that was
it reminded me a lot of
it's Eddie Arnold, the cattle call, and if I'm not mistaken, the movie opens with this song, and it just had,
and it comes up I think at another moment in the movie as well. I think there's one other instance where it's used like very briefly, but it reminded me a lot of the song in Grizzly Man that like coyotes wail right at the end, but
It
it's also
does.
very similar to like Raising Arizona.
Yeah, it's like that yodeling, like country.
Yeah.
It's like this old country tune.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think, again, the music overall worked extremely well. There are parts, for instance, that yodeling song that kind of bring us really quickly into this surreal world. But there's also some, like, there's Madonna, there's Elton John, there's Pogues, there's popular music too, that I think works really well. And as a little note too, just another small piece of trivia, there's actually, River Phoenix and his sister Rain had a band, and I think it's Aleka's Attic, if I'm not mistaken. And so they had a little band together, and there's actually a song from them titled Too Many Colors in the film as well. So River also contributed to the soundtrack.
Yes, yeah.
I bet you didn't know that.
So did the German guy.
Oh, did he really? Oh, so
yeah,
I
that
see
song that he's doing in
yeah.
They recorded that song. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So you tied me on that. I thought I could pull one over on you, but nope, you got me.
I got it. Yeah, in
anyway,
back pocket.
There you go. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation about the film. I'm so glad you enjoyed the film. Period. Because that's really fun for me to share films with people. And for those listening, if you've not seen the film, it'd be kind of weird if you were listening to this and you hadn't seen it, but maybe that's what you've done. Don't worry, it's not a film that you can spoil because there's not really any plot.
Yeah.
So still go check out the film. But excellent. Well, Cullen, thanks as always, man. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and thanks to everybody out there for taking a listen. We really appreciate you, and we will catch you next time.
Yeah, bye-bye.